Yo, what's going on, guys? I'm Sam. Recently, I was looking at Apple's iPad lineup, and I realized that there are technically 5 different iPads you can buy now, and for most people, that's extremely confusing. I don't know what Apple was thinking to have 5 separate screen size iPads on the market, but they have them now, and I have 4 of the 5. The only iPad that I won't be exclusively referencing in this video is the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, but for that, no, it's just the iPad Pro, exactly, with a slightly larger display. Obviously, all of these are coming at very different price points, so I want to talk about which one is the best iPad for you. If you're excited for that, drop a like down below. It always helps me out, and hit subscribe so you stay up to date on all the latest Apple news. Let's go ahead and jump into this mess. So starting off for $329, Apple just calls this one the iPad because it has the least amount of features, and everything on here is, I would consider, mediocre at best. For example, the screen. It's okay, but it is definitely the worst display on any iPad that Apple currently sells because not only is it 9.7 inches, which is not huge, but it has a non-laminated display, which means that there's actually a small air gap in between the LCD display that this has and then the glass above it that you actually touch as the user. It doesn't look awful, but compare it to the screen on any of these other 3 iPads and you will notice immediately it just doesn't look as good. So that's why, because Apple wanted to save some money here, they didn't want to laminate it directly to the glass, and you'll notice that. And at the bottom of the screen here is the Touch ID sensor, which is first generation on this iPad, so to me it doesn't feel very quick. On the inside you get an Apple A10 Fusion chip, which is the exact same processor that shipped inside of the iPhone 7 in 2016, so in 2019, it's going on almost 3 years old. If you want this iPad to last a really long time, just know that that technology has been out for a couple of years, and it definitely won't last you as long as far as software updates go or just general usability as something like one of the newer iPad mini, iPad Pro, or iPad Air models. And it's not going to be slow. It's still going to be able to process your web browsing, photo editing, music, whatever. Just, it's going to slow down quicker than these other models. RAM-wise, you get 2 GB on here, which is the lowest of any iPad. Why would that be? It's just the cheapest one. And camera-wise, that's basically the other tenet of this iPad. You've got an 8-megapixel shooter on the back, I believe a 7-megapixel front-facing camera. Correction, I actually just checked on apple.com, and it's a 1.2-megapixel FaceTime HD camera. So just another knock against this iPad for it being high quality. Using it is going to be fantastic, but if you compare it to any of these other iPads, especially photo-wise, you'll know, yeah, this is the $329 one. The cameras are not Apple stereotypical cameras where the quality is really good and the dynamic range is off the charts. These are cheap cameras that Apple put in here, again, to cut costs. And I hope you're noticing that the trend with this cheapest iPad is the fact that it's the cheap one. It's going to do everything that an iPad can do as far as apps go, but how you do it and the experience while doing these things is going to be a little bit cheaper, a little bit more fragmented, I would argue, than on something like the next iPad in the line, starting at $399 here in the US, is the iPad mini. I actually never owned an iPad mini myself until I just picked this one up because Apple just refreshed it after almost 4 years of absolutely no updates, while the design of the iPad mini, except for the relocation of the mic hole to the center on the back, we do have an Apple A12 processor on the inside. And that is the story of this iPad mini. It's exactly what we got with the iPad mini 4, but it does have the Apple A12 processor. And if there's one thing you want to know about that chip, it's the same one that is in the 2018 iPhones, XS, XS Max, and XR. It's going to last you forever because it is so quick. And I would argue that if you compare that to something like the A10 and the iPad, you'll notice the difference. For RAM on here, you're sort of in the middle. You get 3 GB as well as getting 3 GB on the iPad Air, which we're going to jump into momentarily. The iPad mini also has an LCD screen that looks a lot sharper to me because it is laminated. This one's laminated on the iPad mini. It's also laminated on the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. The colors are insane, and this iPad supports the wider P3 color gamut, so everything pretty much just pops. And this and all the consecutive iPads that I talk about afterwards do support True Tone. For anybody that doesn't know, True Tone is one of my favorite features. It's where the white balance of the display dynamically adjusts based on the ambient light around you. So if you're in a warmer lighting environment, the screen will appear a little bit more orange. If you're in a cooler lighting environment, the screen will appear a little bit more blue. It's honestly extremely subtle and I love it, but it is worth noting that this iPad and the iPad Air and the iPad Pro support this, where the $329 iPad does not. Again, that's a bell and whistle you're not getting. Right at the bottom of this screen, you do get a second generation Touch ID sensor, and going back to Touch ID was actually fantastic. It is super quick, it is super speedy, and it genuinely kind of made me miss Touch ID. The iPad Pro, which we'll jump to in just a little bit, doesn't have Touch ID. It has the facial scanning Face ID system, which is more premium and secure, but a little admittedly slower. This iPad mini, like the iPad, supports the first generation Apple Pencil, so you're using a pencil on this from 2015 or 16. It's a couple of years old now, but because it's laminated here, it's very smooth and it feels much more like you're actually drawing on this iPad. On the iPad mini, camera-wise, if you're gonna be shooting photos, you get 8 megapixels on the back. Again, incredibly mediocre. I did not find this impressive at all, unfortunately. And on the front, a 7 megapixel FaceTime HD camera, so FaceTime will look a lot better. The big takeaway with this iPad, and what's weird is because it has a smaller 7.9 inch screen than the 9.7 inch display on the $329 iPad, is portability. Before this, I had never extensively used an iPad mini, but over the past few days, I just kept telling myself when I was using it, wow, this is so tiny. Wow, I can take it anywhere. Wow, I can slide it in the pocket of my hoodie. If portability is the number one thing that you care about in a tablet, then you should definitely look at that. The cost of looking at this iPad mini is the fact that while that's a bonus for some people, 7.9 inches is nearly as big as something like the iPhone XS Max or the iPhone X Plus. It's just not a gigantic screen, but I think it makes up for that in processing power, Apple Pencil support, and a beautiful laminated display that supports True Tone. Up until 2019, that's where the gap was. You had that 9.7 inch really low-end iPad, you had the outdated 7.9 inch iPad mini, and then you just jumped up to the 10.5 inch iPad Pro, or more recently the 11 inch iPad Pro, and in the middle, there wasn't really anything to compensate for that mid-range price point until March of 2019 when Apple announced the iPad Air. Technically coined the iPad Air 3, this is that mid-range iPad. I think this iPad was actually really needed in the lineup because there was that huge price differential between an okay iPad and the best iPad. This is that mid-range variant. For me, this checks all the boxes that a $499 tablet should, and I would coin this the best value iPad you can get. Because, well, let me tell you, there's a gorgeous 10.5 inch display on here, fully laminated so there is no air gap, wide P3 color gamut, True Tone support, and yes, this does support the Apple Pencil as well, so it's extremely responsive, it is extremely fluid, and I just can't get over how good this iPad is. As soon as I started using this device, personally, I feel like I could sacrifice $300 and not get the iPad Pro and be pretty damn satisfied with the feature set you're getting on this iPad. Also, to mention while we're on the front of this device here, you do get a Touch ID sensor. It's second generation, so it's pretty much instant, and it doesn't have Face ID like the iPad Pro. Camera-wise, you get the exact same cameras that you do on the iPad Mini 5, so it's nothing special. 7 megapixel FaceTime HD camera, 8 megapixel shooter on the back, totally unimpressive and boring by any standard. And you guessed it, powering the entire experience on here, including those dumb cameras, is the A12 processor. So it's just as quick as the iPad mini, and everything's fluid, everything is quick. In fact, the iPad Pro, which we'll get to in just a second, has an A12X processor, but that costs $300 more for the starting model, and I honestly can't notice a difference between the A12 and the A12X. That's just me. I'm sure some people could, but I think for the average person, you're not going to notice a difference between the two. I talked about the Apple Pencil support earlier. It is first generation again, and I am bringing up that first generation pencil here because the iPad Pro does support the second generation Apple Pencil, and you'll see right now when we get to the iPad Pro, the top of the line, why this is $799 right off the bat. It is not a cheap iPad. This is an iPad for people that are going to be using their tablet a ton, that want the best of the best, and want an iPad that's going to last like years down the line. I think the others are going to last long as well, but you do get that slightly tweaked A12X processor. It has a ton of cores in here, more cores than any other iPad, and if you look at the display, it also has a really good GPU in here as well, the best in the iPad line as well. But the display, guys, it is all screen. While the bezels are thin around the edges of the iPad Air, It looks great. You got thin bezels on the edges of the iPad mini and then just sort of beefy edges on the iPad. This is all screen. You pretty much get equal bezels all the way around and you don't get Touch ID on here. With this design comes Face ID as well. So this is the only iPad out of these four that has Face ID. It is more secure than Touch ID. I actually prefer it in most cases because you don't have to really touch the device. It automatically scans your face in any scenario that it would need to use Touch ID, and I like being able to just kind of look at my device and then swipe up to get in. Admittedly though, it is a little bit slower. So if you want the fastest unlock experience, ironically, you don't get that on the most expensive iPad. You get that on the iPad mini or the iPad Air. There's another big bonus with this display though, and this is where you start getting into those extra features that may make you question whether or not that extra $300 from the Air to the Pro is going to be worth it. It is 120 Hz on the iPad Pro, which is twice the refresh rate of any of these other iPad displays. That means that scrolling looks like the content is stuck to your finger. You'll never notice how good the screen on the iPad Pro is until you actually use it, because the screen on any other iPad is 60 Hz, and that looks incredible until you compare it to this. And then you realize that a twice as smooth display is incredible, and it is the main reason, honestly, that I use this iPad Pro instead of the iPad Air. I don't know if that feature is worth $300. There's a couple of other things that factor into that higher price point as well, but I will say that that is one of the biggest reasons. It looks incredible, and here's a small comparison. And you get True Tone as well on here if that's a feature that you're interested in. Further down the list of display bonuses is support for, or just more broadly with the iPad Pro, is support for the second generation Apple Pencil. This one directly attaches to the iPad, so you're not going to lose it as easily. Battery life to me is roughly the same as the first generation Apple Pencil, but with this, you not only get a newer, nicer matte finish, you get some additional features. Namely, when you're inside of an application, you can double tap to switch tools, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're like me, you write a lot and you just make mistakes. Before, you would have to, on the first generation Apple Pencil, touch something and then like the eraser tool and then go back to the pencil, touch on that. Now I could be writing, double tap to erase, double tap again, and I'm writing again. It's extremely quick, it's extremely efficient, and it makes me frustrated that this pencil came out in 2018 and it works with the 2018 iPad Pro. That's when the iPad Pro was last updated. But both the 2019 iPad mini and the 2019 iPad Air aren't compatible with this product. I get why. It's because there's no way to physically or magnetically attach this to those iPads because of their older remedial design. At the same time, I hate that Apple came out with a newer iPad that's compatible with an older pencil. You get that 120 Hz display, so everything looks like it's almost coming out of the pencil itself. There's really no delay at all. It's not very apparent on the 60 Hz every other iPad except the iPad Pro. I just feel like this is absolutely, unquestionably the best experience with the Apple Pencil. So if you do art, the Pro iPad is probably worth it for you, just because if you do art a lot, this pencil is better in every way. Now I want to jump to cameras, because this is another part of that higher price tag. You get a camera, to me, photo-wise, that is nearly identical to the camera you got on the iPhone XS or the iPhone XR. When I say the photos are incredible, just take a look at the difference on some of these. The dynamic range on the iPad is so good on this iPad Pro, and you even get 4K video here. All the other iPads in this video can only shoot 1080p video. This one, you get 4K video. And again, looks just as good, although the video stabilization on here is really wonky. I'm not sure why. So basically just don't move and you'll be fine. The bells and whistles don't stop there though. You also get stereo speakers on the iPad Pro, so 2 up top and 2 on the bottom. On every other iPad that Apple sells, you're only getting 2 speakers. So if you want to do a lot of media consumption, watch a lot of Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, any streaming service of your choice, Game of Thrones on HBO is incredible. It really is great for extended periods of viewing. However, you're not getting a headphone jack on the iPad Pro 11 or 12.9 inch models. So if you want to listen to music traditionally, you'll have to use an adapter, a USB-C to 3.5mm headphone jack adapter on the iPad Pro, where on device, straight out of the box, you can listen to headphones with the headphone jack on the iPad, iPad mini, or iPad Air. For some of you, that could be a drawback. For some of you, you might not care. For some of you, that could be a positive. Either way, I have AirPods, so I don't even need a headphone jack. Now guys, I'm just playing, but that is largely where the list runs out for the iPad Pro. As you can see, These are four pretty different iPad models. To recap, you should buy the $329 iPad if money is at the top of your mind, if you don't have a ton of it to spend, and you want to get something that'll get the job done. The iPad, I want to emphasize here, is not bad. You just have to go into that iPad knowing that the experience overall, a slower processor, a worse display, pretty bad cameras, they're not going to cut it when you compare it to any other iPad that Apple's currently selling. However, you want to step up a little bit. You want that A12 processor that is going to last you forever. You can get the $399 Buckaroo iPad mini. You get the same Apple Pencil support, but a laminated display and slightly better cameras, specifically on the FaceTime HD camera. If you want a bigger screen, but pretty much the iPad mini, again, you can step up to that $499 iPad Air. Again, if you're on the fence about which iPad you can get and you have $500 to spend, I think you will without question be the most happy, get the most bang for your buck with the iPad Air. But if you want the best of the best, you want that 120 hertz display, you want stereo speakers, you want support for Apple Pencil 2, you want this design, and you want a slightly faster processor. If you are seriously looking to get this iPad to do professional work on it, then there's no question of which iPad you should buy, and you know that. It's the $799 iPad Pro. But one interesting thing to note on the iPad Pro is you can get up to 1 terabyte of storage on it, and if you get the 1 terabyte iPad Pro, you get 6 gigabytes of RAM. Otherwise, you'll get 4 on the iPad Pro. So that is your in-depth look at every iPad that Apple is currently selling. The oldest iPad of the bunch is the iPad. Everything else has been updated in the past 6 months, and I think it is a good time to buy pretty much anything in this video, but I would be weary of buying that $329 iPad just because it's overdue. It's been a year, and Apple traditionally has been updating that model each and every single year. In the meantime, this is what you've got. Let me know what you think the best iPad for your daily use is down below, and whether or not this video helped you out. If you enjoyed it, drop a like. It seriously helps me out, and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. I've been Sam. I hope you're doing swell, and I'll talk to you in my next video.